Hey guys, I'm Will Dabbs for Guns Magazine, and today we're going to talk about the IWI Israeli weapons industry Tavor X95 5.56mm rifle. Now this is an Israeli design, was adopted in 2009 as the standard infantry weapon for the IDF, for the Israel Defense Force. And to understand the nature of this weapon, what makes it exceptional, and how extraordinary it is, you need to kind of understand its background. And to explain that, let me tell you a quick story. Back when I was an Army officer, I had the privilege of meeting one of my Israeli counterparts. He was an Israeli officer who was in the U.S., seconded for training, and it was just a pleasure getting to know him. And as we were sitting around talking shop over a cold Coke, comparing and contrasting his military experience and mine, he told me a story, something that I've never forgotten. He actually asked me at that point how far it was from my family to the nearest organized military that was bent on my destruction. Now, this was during the Cold War, so I had to think a moment, and I said, well, probably the Fulda Gap in Germany, maybe 4,500 miles. And he smiled and took a sip out of his Coke, and he said that my kids go to school 30 minutes by T-72 tank from the nearest army that wants them dead. And considering the impact of that story and that observation, that just goes to explain why the Israelis are what they are. They're surrounded by nations who want to push them into the sea, and those people are born fighting. Now, they have an unrivaled domestic military weapons production program because Israel is never more than one UN resolution away from an arms embargo, and so they've got to find themselves self-sufficient. And so they made a long series of truly extraordinary infantry weapons, culminating with the Tavor X95. Now, the X95 is a fairly unconventional weapon, as you can see. It's a bullpup design, meaning the action is located behind the fire controls. That makes the overall weapon very short. So even with a street-legal 16.5-inch barrel, the X95 is still markedly shorter than a comparable M4. Now, as a result of its rugged manufacture, it's relatively heavy. An X95 tips the scales at a little bit less than 8 pounds, but because it's a bullpup design, most of the mass is located over your right arm, and it doesn't feel quite as heavy as it would otherwise if it was a more conventional layout. Now, just like everything the Israelis make, this thing is designed for combat. And so the controls are very well reasoned. It operates using a long stroke action, sort of a distant cousin to an AK, so it's phenomenally reliable. The weapon can be reversed for right or left-handed feed by swapping out some parts. The charging handle is non-reciprocating. It can be oriented on either the right or left-hand side. The X95 feeds from any standard Stanag M16 or M4 magazine, up to and including extended mags and drums. The Israelis did a better job by organizing the human engineering of a bullpup rifle than I've ever seen in any other example. For instance, the magazine release is located right here underneath your first finger. So unlike a lot of other bullpup designs, if you want to drop the magazine, you just hit that button right there and the magazine drops out. Naturally, a bolt locks to the rear on the last round fired, and the bolt release is back behind the magazine. So when you slam in a new magazine, you hit that release, and the magazine changes are almost as fast as the same operation with an M4. The forearm is removable. There are rails underneath. There's a full-length rail on the top for optics. Very, very versatile weapon, and it's got a top-notch set of folding backup iron sights that are built into the rifle. So once again, just like all Israeli military weapons, these things are made for combat use, for hard service, brilliantly executed. I've actually been to Israel before, and the X95 rifles that I saw that the IDF was using were very similar to this, except they had conventional pistol grips with a small trigger guard. This is what's called a cutlass grip, and the IWI sells either. They're easily interchangeable. And the IDF weapons that I saw had a 13-inch barrel, where obviously the street-legal versions in the U.S. are 16.5. That's the IWI X95 Tavor 5.56mm rifle. It represents the absolute state-of-the-art in infantry combat rifles today. So why would you want one of these things? They're relatively expensive, a little bit heavier than an M4. They're markedly more expensive than your typical bargain basement M4 clone. Well, the significance here and what appealed to me is that this thing actually has combat cred. The IDF uses this thing all the time. Sadly, the Israelis find themselves subject to terrorist action fairly frequently. But those terrorist acts never last very long because there's always some hardcore young man or woman wandering around most crowds carrying something like this with a magazine or two handy. And that's their greatest deterrent against terrorist action against their civilian populace. So when you walk into your local gun store and you look around, everything looks the same. This will really set you apart. It is a remarkably refined, exceptional infantry combat tool. And as you can see, just great fun to shoot. So, as always, I appreciate your time. I'm Will Dabbs for Guns Magazine, and you all have a great day.